Hey guys, good morning, welcome back. It's about 2:15 a.m. Saturday morning. I wanted to get back here in a moment to a topic that I introduced briefly at the end of the last lecture. This notion of a diplomatic revolution that Germany was experiencing in the 1930s. Now, as you know, 1920s, could not have been any worse for Germany. Woeful economic situation, weakened Weimar government, no military to speak of whatsoever. But out of that backdrop, we see the emergence in the 30s of this new German military machine. They are completely ascendant during the 1930s to the point where, hey, by the mid to late 30s, they are a colossus, they are a behemoth, they are the new brute on the block. So an upward trajectory, a meteoric climb by Germany. It's a complete diplomatic revolution that we're going to be discussing later on. It's an incremental process, but it happens rather quickly. Before we get there, folks, I want to talk for a few moments today or this evening about what I refer to as the branches of hate, the various subgroups or branches of hate under the larger Nazi umbrella. Now, obviously, they're Nazis, so you can assume fairly they're evil, sadistic, psychotic, erratic, compulsive. So understand all of that. These are not good people. They're the worst people, obviously. Himmler, who I've always described as the face of evil. Heinrich Himmler, the face of evil. He did ascend to the number 2 position in the government by the mid to late 30s, largely because he controlled 2 different branches of hate. He was the leader of the Black Shirts, or the SS, as I mentioned before. They were an extreme political assassination group, a protection squad, a group of bodyguards who protected the Fuhrer, but again, known for extreme political tasks like assassinations, the SS. Himmler also oversaw, was the leader of the Gestapo, okay, the Gestapo, Gestapo, the Gestapo. The Gestapo was, in essence, the Nazi secret police. They were in charge of underground, covert activities, like wiretapping or letter opening. If there was a political dissident, they would track them down at nighttime in a dark alley somewhere and have them killed. So they're the secret police. And Himmler oversaw both the Gestapo as well as the SS. Next individual is named Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring. You spell Göring, G-O-R-I-N-G. Göring was actually a flying ace, one of the best pilots for the Germans in the Great War, World War I. But following World War I, he became a morphine addict, and he also became some sort of a rabble-rouser in the early Nazi SA. Years later, however, once they formed the Luftwaffe, we're going to see that they give, given his background as a flying ace, they give, as a sign of loyalty to Göring for years of loyalty, he becomes the head of the Luftwaffe in the mid-30s, Hermann Göring. Now lastly, Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, you spell Goebbels like Goebbels, G-O-E-B-B-E-L-S. Dr. Joseph Goebbels was the Minister of Hate and Propaganda. That's quite a title, the Minister of Hate and Propaganda. So to give you an idea how erratic his behavior was, Goebbels in the 30s saw the growth in German society of a new figure that he believed to be subversive and also a threat to the core Nazi values in Germany and maybe also the future German supremacy. And he had this forced ban. He saw it as a threat and he banned it forever from Nazi society. The force that he was dealing with was Mickey Mouse. Okay, so he had sort of impulsive behavior, and he banned Mickey Mouse from Germany during the 30s. So it gives you an idea where we're at right now with these people. Let's fast forward here a little bit. Now, as you know, 1934 was a big year for the growth of Nazi Germany. They attend the Geneva Disarmament Conference, and again, it's very contrived, it's very orchestrated, but during the middle of the French presentation, Hitler and his cronies, the whole Nazi table, stand up in unison and they file out. But it sends a message to the European community that, hey, they're rejecting the Treaty of Versailles, they are a force to be reckoned with, they are rearming, not disarming. It was a concern. That concern, of course, only grew even more great when that same year they openly rejected Versailles with the creation of the Luftwaffe and conscription or the draft, and they formally departed from the League of Nations. So, we're seeing here signs of concern within the European community by 34 and 35. So, 1935, it's a pretty momentous, a pretty pivotal year in the incremental growth of Nazi Germany. So in 35, we're going to see the first example of the dominant European or Western philosophical diplomacy in dealing with Hitler and the rise of the Nazi state. So the word is appeasement. We're going to hear this again, but I'll say it today. It's the first example where the West is going to appease Hitler. A-P-P-E-A-S-E-M-E-N-T. So what is the first example of appeasement? I'll give you guys a definition here in a few minutes. So in 35, the English are going to negotiate a pact, a treaty with Germany known as the Anglo-German Naval Pact. The Anglo-German Naval Pact, signed in 35. And again, it's the Nazis negotiating on relatively equal footing with their rivals, the English. So with this pact, what is stated? The English are going to, again, the message here is pretty clear. They're saying, hey, perhaps Versailles was a little bit heavy-handed, a little bit severe, a little unfair to the German state. And they say with this new document, the Anglo-German Naval Pact, that Germany can now have a navy. They can have a navy, but it can only be 35% the size of the massive and mighty English navy. So you can have a navy, but it can't be as big or even close to being as big as the English navy. So what are they doing here, guys? Think of it in these terms. The English are saying, hey, Germany, have a crumb, have a morsel, okay? Just don't take the entire cookie. They want to appease or satisfy this madman, give him something and hope that he does not take the entire European continent and the world. That is appeasement, to try to satisfy your opponent, in this case a madman, by giving him something so he won't take everything. Is it a good way to deal with a bloodthirsty, ego-driven megalomaniac? Probably not. As it proves here time and time again, it's a poor decision to appease a madman. But yet it becomes the dominant diplomatic message and philosophy of the West during this time period. The first time is with the English and the Naval Pact in 35. Let's fast forward here a little bit. 1936, another pivotal year, another important moment in the progression. So Hitler is going to plan his first military operation in 1936. They're still pretty new militarily, but they're going to plan their first operation in 36. And I ask you, where do you think they go first to begin this process? Maybe you're thinking Austria to realize his goal of Anschluss and the unification of his two home countries, one adopted, one birth. No. Maybe the USSR. Well, that's too large of a task, right? He does hate the communists and he sees the Slavs as being subhuman, but that's way too much to bite off. So the first military operation in March of 1936 is going to be the German invasion of Germany. They're going to invade the Rhineland, the French-occupied DMZ that have been occupied since 1919 and the Treaty of Versailles. He wants that land back. And guys, again, this is directly against the provisions set forth at the PPC by the Treaty of Versailles. And interestingly enough, his generals told Hitler on the eve of this invasion, they said, Führer, don't do this. We are not ready. We're not prepared. We're too green for this kind of operation. Listen to your generals. Please don't do this. Hitler thinks on it for a second and says, you know what? We're going to do it anyway. I feel good about it. He follows his instincts. So Hitler brings in March of 1936 a ragtag German army into the DMZ against a much bigger French army. What do the French do? Before I give it away, let me reveal that this time period, the mid-1930s, what happens next reveals a certain air of pacifism, both in France and in England. Okay, there's this tone of pacifism. There's a great and all-consuming fear of another war. There's also a belief that kind of floats around that perhaps the West, England and France, were a little bit too severe at the PPC. So what's going to happen now? Hitler invades the Rhineland and the French drop their guns. They retreat out of the Rhineland and Germany regains that land along the Rhine River. So the French are going to go where? They report, they inform the League of Nations. They inform the League of Nations, hey, this happened, this went against Versailles. Please back us up. What does the League of Nations do to support the French? Nothing. They lack the military prowess, the military standing. The League of Nations does nothing to prevent what has happened and to support the French. It's interesting that later on, a couple years later, Hitler, they asked him about that experience and the Rhineland. He says, you know what, my confidence was not yet in place. I was still young in what I was trying to attempt to do. My confidence was not in place, and he relayed that, quite honestly, I think that if the French would have fought back, probably, given our lack of numbers and experience, I would have retreated. But then he shared that because the French retreated, my ego, my confidence swelled and soared, and I became a new man afterwards, and I knew that I could do it. So really, the French there missed a golden opportunity to stop this madman while he was still building confidence. And now he's got unbridled arrogance, and the West is now going to be in trouble. Okay, so fast forward now a couple of years. 1938. 1938, now Hitler begins to think about and talk about out loud at, very, very strongly German nationalistic rallies, Nazi rallies. He talks about Anschluss. He begins to talk about the unification of his home country, birth country of Austria, the union with Germany, his adopted country. Again, the realization, the goal of Anschluss. Anschluss, Anschluss. Guys, keep in mind, in Austria during the mid-30s, there was a large group of Austrian citizens that were German speakers, and they wanted to belong to Germany. They spoke German, they belonged to the Nazi Party. Keep in mind that before the PPC and the end of World War I, many of those same people, they belonged as a majority citizen in a larger, more powerful Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now they were just a minority group, a minority ethnic group, a German speaker, in a smaller, greatly reduced, less important Austria. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you can recall the whole backdrop of Nazism, and many people there, not the Von Trapps, but many people were, of course, pro-Nazi, pro-Germany. Point is, March of 1938, Hitler is going to notify the Austrian Chancellor. He writes them a message, a note, and says, hey, come to my country estate. I've got a lovely mountain resort, a mountain alpine compound. Come up and see me along the German-Austrian border. We'll have a spot of tea, we'll have a little bit of coffee, maybe something stronger if you like. Come visit me along the German-Austrian border. I'd like to speak with you. Now, the man's name, when I get this down, it's a mouthful, The Austrian Chancellor was a man named Kurt von Schuschnigg. Kurt von Schuschnigg. You spell Schuschnigg Schuschnigg. Kurt von Schuschnigg, and you'll see the photographs later on Schoology. Very, very bookish character, intellectual, rather bookish, and maybe a little bit stoic and a little bit placid in his whole character. Much more intellectual. Maybe as a Austrian chancellor, he would have made a pretty good college professor. That's how he looked. His little, circular John Lennon granny glasses. Kurt von Schuschnigg. But anyway, von Schuschnigg is going to accept the invitation to visit Hitler's evil mountain lair along the Austrian border at a place called Berchtesgaden. Okay, Berchtesgaden. And things go pretty good initially. March of 38, he comes to the door, Hitler takes his coat, and they have exchanged some pleasantries. It's going pretty okay initially. They go to the back of the structure, and they take in this gorgeous view. We can see, 3 or 4 different countries. It was placed there symbolically so Hitler could look out and see his destiny, his future. So they talked for a little bit. Then shortly after, things went poorly. The worm turned here pretty quick. So for the next 4 hours, Hitler proceeds to absolutely harangue, verbally harangue or harass the poor von Schuschnigg for the next 4 hours, hammering him, "You must support me on Anschluss. We need this as a German people. We have to have this done." So 4 hours of absolute abuse of this Austrian chancellor. By the very end, the guy he's pretty much been taken to a very submissive place, a very weak place. He tells Hitler as he walks out the door, "I will strongly consider Anschluss, and when I get back to Vienna, I will add additional Nazis into my cabinet to, as a show of faith." Okay. On the way home, von Schuschnigg is going to find his mojo a little bit, and we find a little bit of, masculine strength. He decides, it wasn't that bad. Hitler was a little bit crazy, a megalomaniac, but he has his country and I have mine. So what von Schuschnigg decides to do on the way back to Vienna is not grant membership to Nazis in his cabinet, but to host a plebiscite in Austria once he returns. And a plebiscite, as you know, is a yes-no vote. And the question to the people of Austria will be, would you like to remain a free, independent Austria, or do you want to see the realization of Anschluss, the union with Germany? So he gets back to Vienna. The next day's paper reads, "Plebiscite to be held on the question of Austrian independence or Anschluss." Who absolutely loses their mind? Hitler. He's going to lose his mind. He immediately brings the German army down to the Austrian border. They force the resignation of von Schuschnigg. Okay, von Schuschnigg is forced to resign. The army's on the border still waiting for their cue. What do you think was the new party affiliation then of the next Austrian chancellor? You guessed it, he was a Nazi. And he immediately, this new Nazi chancellor, said to the army on the border, "Come on in." He invited them in. And so truly the march on Vienna was fairly anticlimactic. So mid-March 1938, the new Nazi chancellor invites the German army to take Vienna. And at that point in time, his dream has been achieved. Anschluss, the union of Austria, and his home country, or his adopted country, Germany. By the way, on a side note, von Schuschnigg spends World War II at Dachau in a concentration camp or a work camp. And then after the war, he does go to America and ironically takes a job as the president of St. Louis University. So von Schuschnigg eventually does pursue that path after all as a college professor or president. Okay, so we're now into 1938, as you know. During this time period, it's all about, in Hitler's mind, all about another country. He now has Austria. He looks further east to a different country. He wants to smash Czechoslovakia. He becomes obsessed in the spring and summer of 38 with the utter destruction of Czechoslovakia. They represent all that he despises. Number one, they're pro-democracy. Number two, they have strong political allies and military allies, the English, the French, and the USSR. They got strong allies. And maybe the most personal thing to Hitler is the fact that, as you know, Czechoslovakia was crafted, was created, was formed, where? At the PPC, the Treaty of Versailles created Czechoslovakia. And again, it used to be mostly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and partially Germany. There's lots of German speakers in this land. So Hitler becomes, in the summer of 38, obsessed with crushing Czechoslovakia. Now he speaks mostly about one region of Czechoslovakia. It is a mountainous region known as the Sedating Land. The Sedating Land, the western rim or edge of Czechoslovakia, is called Sudetenland. Sudetenland. The Sudetenland, I'll say it again, Sudetenland. Now, the reason that Hitler was talking so much about Sudetenland in 1938 was due to the fact that it was very much heavily German. There were 3.5 million German speakers in the Sudetenland. 3.5 million speakers. There's also a strong membership of what party? You guessed it, a strong Nazi party involvement there. So during 38, he begins to talk a lot about taking over the Sudetenland. There were several riots there of Nazis protesting Czech occupation or Czech rule. So we see now the English get involved in September of 1938. September of 1938, we're going to see the English Prime Minister, a man named Neville Chamberlain, contact Hitler and say, may I come to Germany and talk to you directly, frankly, about this issue of Czechoslovakian independence in the Sudetenland and elsewhere. So September, Neville Chamberlain, the Conservative Party Prime Minister of England, is going to go and visit, once again, up in Berchtesgaden, up in the alpine beauty of Germany. Chamberlain, for the first time, hops on an airplane in his life and flies to Germany. And then he does it again 2 weeks later, twice, trying to save the Sudetenland and eventually the fate of Czechoslovakia. So Neville Chamberlain, and by the way, it's Neville Chamberlain, probably was the wrong guy at the wrong time. He didn't really understand the evil in the heart of Hitler. He really didn't. Chamberlain is a jolly good chap. He's old school English. He likes his tea. He likes his ale, perhaps. He didn't quite understand the hate, the anger, the evil in this man's heart, Hitler. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Chamberlain represented a very strong contingent of people in England during the 30s who wanted, above all else, to avoid future conflict. And then lastly, again, Chamberlain also believed that perhaps Germany got the raw and the short end of the stick and very unfair treatment at the PPC back in 1919. So today we give the nickname to Neville Chamberlain, the Apostle of Appeasement. The Apostle of Appeasement. Twice he negotiates with Hitler for Sudetenland, and at one point they thought they had a deal, but it didn't work out. And actually Hitler calls for an actual date to invade Czechoslovakia. The date would have been September 30th, 1938. He calls for the invasion of the Sudetenland, and the world waits, the world quakes, readying for war for about 2 weeks. They managed to organize a meeting the day before the planned invasion. So we're going to see four major powers meet in Munich the day before the planned invasion. It's going to be Chamberlain for the English. It's going to be Hitler, of course, for the Germans. The meeting was actually planned and hatched by one Benito Mussolini for Italy, and they also invite the Prime Minister Daladier for the French. So the French, the English, the Germans, and the Italians are going to meet September 29th for the Munich Conference. The Munich Conference, and again, I'll stop right there, and you know by the nickname, the Apostle of Appeasement, what's going to happen here at Munich, and I'll discuss that next time we speak. Have a good evening, and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.